Thanks, guys. I feel really celebrated. It made me laugh how multiple people brought me Starbucks this morning. So I feel very seen and loved. But I'm honored to be celebrating my birthday with my church family this morning. Before I dive into our message, I did want to celebrate the work that we did yesterday at Serve Day. Can I hear from those of you who participated in Serve Day? So yesterday was a really beautiful day, especially because the weather cooperated so wonderfully. But for all of you who did come out to serve and partner with Housing for New Hope, thank you so much. I got to hear from Terry. She works for Housing for New Hope. I was in the afternoon crew, and she was just bragging about the morning crew. And she was showing me pictures of the playground that you guys cleaned up as if it was pictures of her grandbaby. She was just so amazed. And for those of you who sorted the kit inventory room, again, she just was amazed by this. And so thank you guys for coming and taking some of your Saturday to live into our name, to be a light in our community. Well, this morning, we are continuing our series called Invite Only. We have been, for the last couple weeks, looking at Jesus's invitational life, because when we look at Jesus's life throughout the Gospels, one of the things that we see him constantly doing is inviting people into his presence, into his kingdom. And so we have been looking at stories and teachings specifically from the Gospel of Luke that center this aspect of Jesus's ministry, especially in the lead up to Easter, which is a time of year when people who might not necessarily be open to going to church are more open. We wanted this invitational lifestyle to be kind of at the top of your mind. Now, if you have been with us the last couple weeks, one of the things that we have looked at is the power of invitation. This is something, especially in Abby's sermon, that she emphasized, that there's actually something honoring and dignifying about being invited or included, that an invitation has the power to make you feel seen, valued, even treasured. And I think we feel the weight of that power most when we reflect on key moments when we were invited, when we were included. I wonder if you look back on your life, what were some of those defining invitations that made you feel seen, that made you feel called up, that made you feel as if you mattered? Well, I spent this week actually reflecting on that question for myself. And one of the stories of invitation that really leapt to mind for me, it actually happened several years ago when I was in a particularly hard season of leadership and ministry. And I was feeling a lot of discouragement, but there was this one day in particular where something had happened, and this relationship wound was especially close to the surface for me. And so on this particular day, I'd spent the majority of the day just in tears. And I felt demoralized as a leader. Does anything that I do matter? And I was praying and I was crying out to God for any shred of encouragement or affirmation in this work that I had been called to. So that just kind of sets the scene of this day. Well, that afternoon, I opened up my computer, and I will never forget where I was sitting in this moment. I remember exactly where I was in my house, what time of day it was. I remember the angle of the light coming through the window. That's how defining it was for me. And so I open up my laptop, and in my inbox, I have a message from a woman who was the ultimate role model for me. For most of my ministry, I had looked up to this woman. She is an author, she is a Bible teacher, but more importantly, she is one of the primary reasons I am a preacher today. Because I had seen this woman, she was the first woman that I ever saw preach with power and authority. And speaking of like remembering where you were, I remember sitting in an arena and hearing this woman preach for the first time. And it was like God awoke something inside of me. Like the Holy Spirit was kind of calling something out of me. And so for years, I had looked to this woman as a role model and a source of inspiration. And over the years, our paths had crossed at various times. We had interacted a little bit online. And that in and of itself was a big deal. Like the fact that she knew I existed, like that was a huge deal. Like she knows I exist. And so all that to say, I open up my laptop and I see that I have this message from this woman. And what she starts to say to me is that she explains that throughout her ministry, she's put on these women's events, but at these events, she's the only speaker. She never has anyone else speak alongside of her. It's just her and her worship team, and she's been doing that for years. But she's writing to me because she says that this coming year, she wanted to change things up a little bit. And she wanted to invite some younger women to come and speak alongside of her. And that led to the whole reason why she was writing me, is she was asking if I would be one of them. So this woman, my ultimate role model, is inviting me. I stared at that laptop with my mouth hanging open for I don't know how long. Like I think I hoarsely called out for Ike to come upstairs, but then I burst into tears again. But this time it was for a very different reason. This time, all I could say over and over again was, this is the kindness of God to me. This isn't really about her. This is God's way of communicating to me. I see you. You matter. What you are doing matters. Don't give up. Keep going. Even though she was the one extending this invitation, I knew it wasn't really about her. It was pointing me to him. Now, as you look back on your own life, I wonder if you have a similar story of invitation. And if you do, it probably highlights for you, can feel it, the power of an invitation. Because what an invitation is really communicating is, I see you. I want you to be a part of what I am doing. You matter. I like having you around. That's what an invitation communicates. But of course, that honor, as great as it was, and whatever honor, whatever invitation maybe you have in your mind, the validation of that invitation, it still pales in comparison to the invitation that we receive from Jesus. When Jesus, the Son of God, invites us to follow him, what he is really saying is, I see you. I want you to be a part of what I am doing. You matter. I like having you around. That is what Jesus says to each and every one of us. And then, as this story really exemplifies, my personal story is that when we say yes to that invitation, is that he then grants us that same invitational power. Now we get to turn and do likewise, to be the hands and feet of that powerful invitation to others. Now we are ambassadors of that dignity, that honor, that inclusion. And so when you think of it that way, it's really incredible that we have been bestowed with such power. But of course, this begs the question then, why don't we exercise this power more? What keeps us from being as wildly inviting as Jesus? And the answer is very simple, which is that it's scary. You see, there is a paradox at the heart of every invitation, which is that while inviting someone is indeed a powerful act, it is also at the very same time terribly vulnerable. Going back to that story of my role model, there was one more part of her invitation that I didn't mention, but that I will never forget. After she explained the vision for this event and why she was inviting me, she actually sort of hedged on the invitation a little bit. After she cast this whole vision, she said, now I know you are super busy and you have a lot going on. Like, you're leading a church, you have little kids, and so please, just take time to think about it. Take time to pray about it. And if you are not able to do this, I completely understand. But just know that this is an expression of how much I respect you, how highly I value you and your leadership. And I read that, and of course I'm like, I don't have to think about it. I'm like, I prayed about it. Yep, God said it's fine. This was a dream come true. I didn't have to think about it. But at the same time, I was so shocked by her modesty. And yet, I think that this points to the reality that it doesn't matter who you are. Inviting is always vulnerable. And that word vulnerable, it means woundable. That's what we're talking about here. Because when you extend an invitation, what you are also doing is risking rejection. Because what is meant to be an honor, what is meant to be a validation, I see you, you matter, I like you, whatever it is, might not be received that way, might not be reciprocated. And that's really humiliating when that happens. And so this morning, what I want to do is look at another story of invitation from the Gospel of Luke, in which Jesus holds these two things together, power and vulnerability, so that we can learn to do the same. And we're going to do that by looking at a pretty well-known story, the story of Zacchaeus. If you were raised in the church, you are probably familiar with this story, but if you were not and you've never heard this name before, you don't know this story, we're going to take a little bit of time just to walk through it. It's actually a very, very short story in Luke 19, but we're going to take some time to orient you and then learn what does this mean for how we can exercise both the power and the vulnerability of invitation to those around us. So as I said, we're going to be in Luke 19, starting with verse 1. And this is how it begins. It says that Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. There was a man there named Zacchaeus who was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. Now, if you were with us last week, Ike talked about another tax collector named Levi. And one of the things that Ike mentioned is that tax collectors were social outcasts because they were considered to be traitors. And the reason why they were considered to be traitors is that these were Jewish men who worked for the Roman Empire. And so they essentially sold out their fellow Jews for power and wealth. But they were also notoriously corrupt. It's not as if they were just doing this job, like it's a dirty job, somebody has to do it, but they were using their position to steal from people. And so you really had to be a person without scruples to take this job in the first place. One of the things that Ike also mentioned is that tax collectors were very wealthy, but Zacchaeus especially so. We're told that this story takes place in Jericho, which was located on a trade route, so a lot of money is passing through the city. There's also a lot of local wealth in Jericho. And so he would have been very wealthy just because of where he was located, but we're also told that he is a chief tax collector. So he's at the top of the tax collector pyramid. Like, he's not even the one collecting all the taxes. But what all of this tells us is that Zacchaeus is wealthy, he is influential, and very likely because of all that, he is despised. And this is hinted at in the next verse. Verse 3, it says, he was trying to see who Jesus was, but he was not able because of the crowd, since he was a short man. Now, this is the verse that launched 1,000 vacation Bible schools. So if you ever attended a VBS or a Sunday school or a Christian camp, you probably sung the song about Zacchaeus being a wee little man was he, which is like the sickest burn. I mean, can you imagine? Like, that is how you are remembered for posterity, of being a wee little man. And so we are told that he can't see because he is short. But we would also suspect that part of the reason that he can't see is that the crowd is also not making room for him, probably because of who he was. Now, one thing that we don't know about Zacchaeus from this story is why he was so curious about Jesus. We can really only speculate. Like, it's possible that he had heard that Jesus was a different kind of rabbi who wasn't afraid to associate with tax collectors like him, or perhaps he was deeply unsatisfied by all that wealth and influence at the cost of being included in community and having meaningful relationships. We really don't know. But whatever the reason, Zacchaeus is determined to see Jesus. Because this is what he does in verse 4. It says, so running ahead, he climbed a sycamore tree to see Jesus, since Jesus was about to pass that way. So I wanted to show you a picture of what one of these trees would have looked like, if we can put that picture up. So this is like a very small version of what this tree would have looked like, but they had these wide, thick branches, and so they were rather easy to climb. But at the same time, let's be very clear. There was no way for Zacchaeus, this influential, wealthy man, this chief tax collector, there was no way for him to climb this tree in a stately way. He would have had to have hiked up his robes and scrambled up this tree. This is not what men of standing do. This is not what men of reputation do. This was not professional or respectable. One Bible commentator noted that Zacchaeus was clearly untroubled by any concern for dignity. Climbing a tree is, in fact, something that only a child would do. And I can't help but wonder if that is the very thing that caught Jesus' attention. After all, in Matthew 18, Jesus says, truly, I tell you, unless you turn and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like a child, this one is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And so what we have here in this moment, this tax collector who's already, I'm sure people are just looking for reasons to make fun of him. Climbing up this tree, he is embodying this. He is dispensing with decorum and trying to access Jesus in this childlike way. And I just wonder if this is the very thing in this giant crowd that caught Jesus's attention. Because this is what happens in verse 5. It says, when Jesus came to that place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, because today it is necessary for me to stay at your house. Somehow, with this giant crowd pressing in on him, Jesus notices Zacchaeus in the back, up in a tree, and makes a beeline for him. But then when he gets there, Jesus does the weirdest thing. He doesn't have a conversation with Zacchaeus. He doesn't ask him any questions. In fact, he doesn't even ask, politely, if he can go over to Zacchaeus' house. Instead, Jesus responds to Zacchaeus' display of indignity by doing something equally undignified, which is to say, Jesus invites himself over. Now, I want to be very clear. Those of us who are familiar with the story, we know this, we just read right past it, but this was as socially taboo then as it is now. Imagine walking out of here and going into the lobby and you're catching up with someone that you haven't seen in a while, and they say to you, hey, we should hang out more, and you say to them, okay, I'll see you tonight at your house at 7 p.m. You would never. In fact, the only people I know who are comfortable doing that are my children. And really, it's not specific to my children. This is something that all kids do. But this is something that is mine and Ike's constant cross to bear, is our kids are constantly asking us to text the parents of their friends to ask if they can come over. And it does not matter how often we say, I cannot do this. This is rude. This is imposing. This is really awkward. It's putting them in an awkward position. It does not matter how many times we have explained it. That will not stop them from asking us again. And in the rare moment when I finally concede, because they come home from school and they've apparently worked out a deal with one of their friends where it's totally okay for them to come over, I will text that parent, but I'm still dying inside. I want them to know that I know this is not acceptable human behavior. You don't just invite yourself over. And the same was as true then as it is now. And yet, Zacchaeus does not seem annoyed at all. He doesn't even seem caught off guard. He doesn't protest saying, hold on, I need to clean up first. I mean, how many women here? If someone says they're coming over, you're like, give me an hour. I need to clean up first. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, I'm not worthy. He doesn't say, slow down, this is moving kind of fast. I was just scoping you out. I wasn't ready for a commitment. He doesn't feel blindsided or imposed upon. Instead, he responds the way I did when my role model invited me, which is to say, he doesn't even have to think about it. It says in verse 6, so he quickly came down and welcomed him joyfully. All who saw it began to complain. He's gone to stay with a sinful man, but Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, look, I'll give half of my possessions to the poor, Lord, and if I have extorted anything from anyone, I'll pay back 4 times as much. And so what we see here is he's not just welcoming Jesus into his house, he is welcoming Jesus into his life. He's welcoming him to be Lord of his life. This is very clearly the exact invitation that Zacchaeus has been waiting for. Now, how in this story does Jesus teach us about how to hold vulnerability and power together? After all, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in this story, the only one who seems to put himself out there is actually Zacchaeus. Author Andy Crouch defines vulnerability as meaningful risk. And in this story, Zacchaeus seems to be the only one doing that. Jesus, on the other hand, with this brazen self-invitation. In this story, it seems like he has nothing to lose. He is the one surrounded by adoring crowds, not the one standing on the margins. And so what Jesus does here in the story seems to be about all power and no vulnerability. And that might be true, except for one thing, which is that when it comes to being vulnerable, Jesus always goes first. You see, before Zacchaeus climbed up this tree, before he hiked up his robes and climbed up this tree and exposed himself to public humiliation by doing so, but before he even spotted this tree, Jesus, the Son of God, had lowered himself, had taken human form, was born as a vulnerable baby in a manger, subjected himself to a lifetime of weakness, and opened himself up to rejection. Which means there was nothing that Zacchaeus could have done in this moment that was more vulnerable than that. Zacchaeus' vulnerability was merely a response to what Jesus had already done simply by being there. Now, why does this matter? Author Henry Nouwen, he says that friendship and love are impossible without a mutual vulnerability. This is something that we talk about quite a bit here at Bright City, that there is no true connection, there is no true community, there is no true intimacy without mutual vulnerability, opening yourself up. But we know this is scary, and so Jesus says, I will go first. I want intimacy with you, and so I will go first. He always goes first. He never invites us to do something he has not already done himself, and only then does he invite us to reciprocate. But here's what else I love about Jesus in this story is that Jesus, we see him, he doesn't simply go first in vulnerability, but he also, if we look carefully, he also goes last. Because in this story, yes, Zacchaeus puts himself out there, but then Jesus sort of responds in kind by inviting himself over. Jesus mirrors Zacchaeus' childlike gesture with a similarly childlike gesture. Both of these grown men displaying this uninhibited openness to one another. What we're seeing is a mutual vulnerability here. And when we look at other stories in Jesus' life, we realize that he actually does this a lot. When people put themselves out there, he does not leave them hanging. Just to give you an example, the hemorrhaging woman. This is a woman who would have been considered ritually unclean. She should not have left her house and exposed herself to the public. But she takes this risk. She puts herself out there to grab the hem of Jesus' garment in order to be healed, this tremendous act of faith. And in that moment, Jesus could have ignored that it happened. He could have, reeled back in horror of being touched by this unclean woman. He could have distanced himself from her, but instead he says, your faith has healed you. He honors her, he dignifies her, but also he associates with this unclean woman. Think about the woman, the immoral woman who anointed Jesus' feet. Again, this is a woman putting herself out there. She is exposed in front of all of these religious men who are very publicly judging her. Does Jesus respond by saying, I don't know her, I didn't invite her here? No, he honors her, he dignifies her. Again, he associates publicly with this woman. And so what we see with all of these stories, with each and every one of these individuals, is he does not leave them hanging in their vulnerability. He is the first to be vulnerable and the last. And there's nowhere more clear than at the end of his life when he dies on a cross. For every one of them, this climax act of vulnerability he shows for them, for you, and for me. And so what we have here in this funny story that children like to sing about is also the story of a man who seemingly puts himself out there by climbing this tree, only to find himself utterly hemmed in by the loving, generous vulnerability of God. And there is no greater safety than that. And so going back to my original question, what does this teach us about reconciling the power of invitation with the vulnerability of invitation? Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, invitation is scary, but adding to this anxiety, I believe, is our cultural moment. We belong to a safe space culture, which is unwilling to be vulnerable unless we are reasonably certain that it is safe to do so. And while I want to be clear, there is absolutely a time and place for that conversation. One of the things that we remember when we remember the cross, when we remember Jesus' love for us, is that there's a very real sense in which responding to the invitation of Jesus means your safe space never leaves you. In fact, that was actually the secret to Jesus' own wild vulnerability. Jesus didn't feel confident because he was perfectly powerful. Jesus was so confident because he was perfectly loved. 1 John tells us that perfect love casts out fear. And Jesus enjoyed perfect love from the Father. It was out of this perfect love that he was able to be vulnerable to us. And we enjoy that same perfect love through him. This is the answer to the question. This is how we overcome the fear of invitation that keeps us from exercising the power of invitation, not by meditating on our vulnerability, but by meditating on his. Because of his perfect self-giving love for us, we can invite people into our lives with as much freedom and honestly foolishness as Jesus. We can invite our friends to church, to Easter, to the Easter egg hunt, even though we don't know what they will say. We can invite our neighbors over for dinner, even though we don't know if they want our care or friendship. We can invite people to the Alpha class because we sense that they're asking some really big questions, even though we don't know if they're ready for it yet. If you are a student, one of the things that means is you don't wait to be invited into things. You, as a follower of Jesus, you are the inviter. It means going first and being vulnerable, sharing your struggles with someone who might need to hear that you are just like them. But all that to say, we can live this invitational life without fear. We can invite people boldly, just like Jesus, and yet people might still say no. They might still reject you. But if they do, if you put yourself out there and you invite someone to Easter and they look at you like you have two heads, you don't have to spend the next week ruminating over this. You don't need to spend the next week wondering, am I the weird one? Was I awkward? Was it me? You don't have to feel embarrassed. You don't have to feel weird, because what Jesus teaches us is that this vulnerability, this going first and meaningful risk, is what love does. His love leads in vulnerability. And so as we close this morning, I want to give you a little bit of time to reflect on where you find yourself in this story. If you are someone who has received that invitation from Jesus and you have said yes, you know how much he loves you, that perfect love. My challenge for you this morning is, are you living that way? Or is the vulnerability of invitation, is that keeping you from exercising the power of invitation? But to some of you, maybe you came in here this morning a little bit like Zacchaeus. Maybe you are curious. You're not yet sure what you think. But if that's you, I want you to know that you can never put yourself out there for Jesus first. Him coming to earth, dying, being raised, that was step one. Your response is step two. His love is not like human love. Maybe you have experienced being vulnerable, opening yourself up, putting yourself out there, and then you were left hanging. I want you to know Jesus' love is not like that. You can bring him your worst. You can bring him your deepest, darkest sin. You will be met with vulnerable love before and behind. And so if that is you this morning and you are ready to take that step to be caught by the love of Jesus, I actually want to pray for you right now. Let's all bow our heads together. Lord, if there's anyone here this morning who really relates to Zacchaeus, has been on the margins of the religious crowd, but is really curious about you, I pray they would know that you look up from that crowd and you make eye contact with them. You are making eye contact with them. And so if there's anyone here this morning who knows that that is them, that they would figuratively come down out of that tree and not just welcome Jesus into their home, so to speak, but welcome him into their lives to be Lord of their lives, because there is no safer love that we can find than we find in you. Thank you, Jesus, for going first in vulnerability so that we don't have to. We thank you. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. I'm going to invite our prayer team forward. If you feel like you're a Zacchaeus here this morning and you want to learn more about Jesus, or maybe you prayed that prayer and kind of made eye contact with Jesus this morning and want to find out more, please come and let our prayer team know. They would love to pray with you. If there's anything else that you just need prayer for this morning, our prayer team would be honored to pray for you. But let's take a few moments now to prepare our hearts for communion, a time when we actively push back against this worldly default of protecting our vulnerability. Communion is when we remember that our security does not come from protecting our own vulnerability. Our security comes from Jesus' decision not to protect his. So let's take some time to reflect on that good news this morning.